The hospital at night did not feel like a place where people were healed. It felt like a place where they were processed. The main lobby was open but not welcoming. Glass walls rising high and blank as courtroom windows, polished floors to clean. To trust, the air cooled to the temperature of obedience. The lights were not warm, they never were. They were white, thin, unflinching. They fell from the ceiling in straight lines and made everything below them look guilty of existing. A security camera turned slowly above the reception desk, mechanical and patient, as if it had all the time in the world to watch the same failures. Repeat, the automatic doors side open, then shut again. They did this with no emotion, no urgency, no dignity. They did not care who came in or what they carried. They were trained only to function. The night nurse walked through them as if she had already been here too long. Her uniform was crisp, not freshly ironed crisp, something sharper than that. The fabric sat against her shoulders, the way a flag sat on a pole, disciplined into stillness. Her hair was tied back tightly, with no loose strands, no decorative softness. The bun was small and efficient, a decision made once and never reconsidered. She wore her ID badge clipped to her chest. The badge was plain. Name, title, hospital logo, barcode, plastic, temporary authority. The kind of object meant to reassure people that the person approaching them belonged somewhere. But on her, it looked like it didn't belong at all. It swung slightly as she moved, catching the light with a small, repetitive, glinting, almost invisible gesture of compliance. A reminder that even the most quiet worker in the building was still tagged. She stopped at the security desk. The guard was slouched. Behind thick glass, his body arranged into a shape meant to communicate boredom. His eyes were on a screen that showed 8 different camera angles at once. A wide-angle view of hallways, a close-up of the pharmacy door, the parking lot, the elevator bank. The nurse held up her badge. He did not look up at her face. He scanned. The badge, with a handheld device, a faint beep cutting through the lobby like an annotation on a file. Night shift, he asked. The question was unnecessary. She was wearing the answer. Yes, she said. One word, clean. No warmth, wasted. He handed the badge back, as if returning something that wasn't valuable. The nurse took it with the same controlled motion she used for everything. No hurry, no hesitation, no extra. Her fingers did not tremble. They did not fidget. The hand that accepted the badge looked like a hand that had been trained not to apologize for taking space. She walked toward the elevators. The lobby followed her in the reflection of the glass. It made her look like she was walking through herself, 2 versions of the same figure. One real and one projected, both moving forward with the same restrained purpose. Above the elevator doors, the digital number blinked down. The doors opened. She stepped inside and stood slightly to the side, leaving more space than she needed, not out of politeness, out of awareness. The elevator was empty, but she still positioned herself as though someone could enter at any moment. The doors closed, sealing her in fluorescent light. The elevator rose slowly. It did not glide like something built for grace. It climbed like something designed for containment. It made a muted groan, mechanical and indifferent, a sound that suggested fatigue that never became failure. When the doors opened on the 7th floor, the air changed. It always did. Hospitals had layers like sediment. The lobby was public. The hallways were controlled. The wards were intimate in the worst wake, close enough to hear a person breathe, close enough to see what fear looked like in its final form, close enough to smell the slow chemistry of illness and antiseptic and human helplessness. Ward 7B was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was quiet. A low hum of fluorescent lighting ran through the ceiling like a current. It wasn't just sound, it was atmosphere. It made the skin feel slightly too tight, like the room itself was bracing. The corridor was long and straight, lined with doors that had small rectangular windows. The glass was thick. The blinds were half drawn. The patients behind them were not hidden for privacy. They were hidden for convenience. There were posters on the wall, hand-washing diagrams, fall prevention reminders, a laminated chart explaining pain on a scale of smiling to crying cartoon faces. The cartoons looked like insults. They reduced suffering to something that could be quantified, managed, checked off. The nurse passed each poster without looking at it. She already knew what they said. She had memorized the rules the way some People memorized prayers at the nurse's station. The overhead light was harsher. It shone down onto the counter, the paperwork, the screens. The central desk was the nerve center of the ward and also its courtroom. Every name on every chart was a case file. Every medication schedule was a verdict. A computer screen glowed, with patient data, lines of numbers and codes. Diagnoses abbreviated into sterile shorthand. Allergies typed in red dot. There was no place for poetry here. There was barely place for humanity. One of the night staff, an older nurse with tired eyes and a coffee cup that looked like it had been through several wars, looked up as the protagonist approached. "Hey," the older nurse said. "You're on early." The protagonist gave the smallest nod. Not a smile, not coldness, just restraint. "I like time," she replied. The older nurse exhaled a laugh that was only half amusement and half exhaustion. "Must be nice." The protagonist didn't answer that. She didn't make it into a conversation. She walked behind the desk, logged into the computer, and checked the board.room numbers, names, vitals, notes. Her gaze moved across the data, the way a person's gaze moved across enemy terrain, never lingering too long, never missing the details. A clipboard lay on the counter. She picked it up. The metal clip clicked softly. The building had its own sounds. The faint beeping of distant monitors, the soft mechanical sigh of ventilation. A door shutting somewhere down the hall. A cartwheel squeaking once, then silencing. Everything was restrained. Everything held. She returned to the corridor and began her rounds. The ward stretched ahead like a corridor in a courthouse, controlled, built to move bodies efficiently from one place to another without asking what those bodies felt. In room 709, an older woman lay sleeping with her mouth slightly open. The monitor beside her displayed a rhythm of green lines and numbers that looked reassuring until you realized it was just proof that a machine could watch someone die in real time. The protagonist checked the BIR bag, adjusted the line, and ensured the drip rate matched the chart. She touched the woman's wrist lightly, 2 fingers, not invasive, just enough to confirm the pulse. The woman stirred slightly, brow tightening, as if even in sleep she was bracing. For discomfort, the protagonist did not say, "It's okay." She had learned long ago that "it's okay" was often a lie. People said to avoid hearing someone else's fear. Instead, she spoke softly, "You're fine. Go back to sleep." The woman's brow smoothed. The protagonist stepped away. In room 712, the man was awake. He sat upright in bed, arms crossed, his hospital gown open at the neck. His eyes were hard with anger that had nowhere to go. When the nurse entered, he looked her up and down as if trying to decide what kind of authority she represented. He demanded. The protagonist remained at the doorway for a moment, not hesitant, assessing the layout of the room. The chair, the bedside table, the distance to the call button, the curtain track, the window she stepped in. Her badge caught the overhead light, a brief flash. "I'm your nurse tonight," she said. He scoffed. "I don't want you. I want a doctor." "You can ask for one," she replied. Her voice did not rise. It did not sharpen. It stayed measured. He leaned forward. "They're ignoring me. They keep pushing pills and calling it treatment." The protagonist's gaze moved to the cup on his tray. Untouched water. Untouched medication. The man's hands were clenched, not shaking, just closed, like fists that had been waiting too long. She didn't argue with him. She didn't defend. The hospital. She looked at him directly and said, "What do you think they're not hearing?" The question landed differently than the usual staff questions. It did not carry impatience. It did not carry condescension. It carried weight, like she actually intended to listen. The man blinked. The anger hesitated, confused by being addressed, like a human instead of a problem. "I'm in pain," he said finally, quieter. "I'm in pain, and they talk to me like I'm exaggerating." The protagonist nodded once, a single motion, a vow. "I hear you," she said. The man's jaw tightened again, but something in his posture loosened, like a knot slackening. Under pressure, she picked up his chart and checked his medication schedule. Her eyes moved quickly. "You refused the last dose," she observed, "because it doesn't work." The protagonist looked up. "Tell me what it felt like." He stared at her. It felt like nothing. Like I swallowed nothing and they walked away. The protagonist absorbed that without flinching. She set the chart down. "I'll call the on-call physician," she said. "I'll document it properly." The man watched her like he didn't believe her. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do that?" The protagonist clipped her pen back into her pocket. "Because it's my job," she said. Then she added, quieter, not softer, just more precise. "And because you're not invisible." The man's eyes flickered, something in them threatening to become tears and then refusing. She turned to leave. Her badge swung slightly. A small motion, a small symbol, a reminder that even truth here had to pass through plastic. She stepped back into the hallway and closed the door behind her carefully. Not to be polite, to control sound, to control space, to control what she could at the end of the corridor. A set of locked double doors marked the boundary between the ward and another wing. The red sign above the keypad read "Authorized Personnel." Only the hospital loved those words. It used them like a prayer. Authorized personnel. Only the nurse walked toward the doors, and as she approached, the keypad light blinked. Waiting, she held up her badge and pressed it against the scanner. A beep. A green light. A click. The doors unlocked. She pushed them open with her shoulder, stepping through without hesitation. Behind her, the doors swung shut again. They sealed with a soft, final sound, like a verdict. And for a moment, as she walked deeper into the building's controlled bloodstream of corridors and glass and silent rooms, the hospital seemed to swallow her whole, another worker absorbed into its system. Another badge moving through the light, but something in her posture did not belong to the hospital. Something in her stillness suggested she had lived in places where doors did not open with a polite beep. Places where locked doors were never meant to protect, only to contain. The fluorescent hum followed her. Constant and merciless, the cameras watched, the patients waited, and outside. Beyond the glass lobby and the security desk and the calm ritual of night shift routine, a city kept breathing, unaware of how quickly a controlled environment could become a cage. Unaware of how fragile safety was when it was built on procedure instead of courage. Unaware, most of all, that the badge on her chest was not the only thing she had earned. It was only the one the institution recognized. Asterisk, the day shift left the hospital the way a committee left a hearing pollet, practiced and unaccountable. They moved through the corridors in clusters, badge lanyards swaying like credentials, coffee cups held like shields. Their voices carried the sound of daytime authority, brisk tones, clipped decisions, the faint confidence of people who believed the building belonged to them, because they only had to endure it in measured hours. Their departure was not dramatic. That was the point. It happened in handoffs and signatures, in quick glances at screens. In the ritual of saying "busy day" as if the chaos was weather and not governance, the fluorescent lights did not change when they left. The temperature stayed the same. The cameras continued their slow rotations, recording the transfer of responsibility the way a machine recorded a pulse, steady, indifferent, unresponsive. To meaning, at the far end of Ward 7B, the elevator doors opened and closed again. A soft chime, a mechanical sigh, then silence where authority had been. The nurse watched them go from the nurse's station, her hands resting on the edge of the counter, fingers spread in a quiet brace. The counter's surface was laminated, wiped so often it had lost any idea of texture. A clipboard lay there, paper clipped tight beneath metal, as if the building trusted only things that could be pinned. Down. She lifted the clipboard. The metal clip snapped. Small sound. Sharp the forms underneath were clean grids with columns for pain scores, vitals, behavioral notes, boxers that reduced bodies to language that could be defended in a meeting. The nurse's pen hovered over the page like a verdict, waiting to be delivered. Across the hall, room 716's door was open. The nurse could see the foot of the bed and the edge of a wheelchair. A family stood inside, a woman in a headscarf, her shoulders tense as wire. A teenage boy with his arms crossed, jaw set, and a man leaning against the wall, his hands buried in his pockets like he was holding himself back from making a scene. In the center of the room, a patient sat upright, thin and exhausted, the hospital gown hanging from his shoulders like a surrender flag. A day supervisor stood near the bed, tablet in hand, posture rigid with procedural certainty. Her badge hung from her neck on a branded lanyard. It caught the overhead light with each movement, a small gleam that looked like confidence. The nurse didn't step into the room. Immediately, she listened. The supervisor's voice carried the tone of someone trained in customer service but wielding it like a weapon. "We've explained this," the supervisor said. "The tests don't show anything that requires immediate intervention." The woman in the headscarf spoke softly, but her voice was the kind that had held families together through storms. "He cannot breathe at night. He wakes up choking. He says his chest—"
The ward held its breath too long. That was how it always happened. Systems stretched silence past safety, waiting for someone else to take the first risk. The hospital had trained its people well. It had trained them to ask permission to survive. It had trained them to submit to danger as if danger were another policy update. The gunman stood near the nurse's station with the weapon angled downward, his attention divided between the supervisor's trembling performance and the corridor's frightened stillness. His eyes kept flicking a movement, to the blinking call light, to the open doorways where patients stared like witnesses who couldn't testify. He was listening for control. He was feeding on it. The supervisor blazer over scrubs, badge high like a claim, was speaking again, voice low, careful. The words were softer now, stripped of their corporate padding. "Please," she said. "Please, tell me what you need." Double quotes, need. The word tasted wrong in the air, as if a need could be filed, as if what was happening could be reduced into a request. The gunman didn't answer immediately. The silence between them was taut, a cord pulled tight enough to snap. In that silence, the nurse with the plain badge felt time narrow. She did not feel fear in the way the others did, hot, dizzy, urgent. She felt it as a cold inventory. Distance, a few feet. Angles, clean, harsh. Cover, minimal. Witnesses, everywhere. Doors, locked. Exit sign, glowing red like a warning that meant nothing. Her breathing stayed steady. In, out. And beneath it, quieter still, a sound she could feel more than hear. Tick. Tick. Her wristwatch, a cheap watch, hospital appropriate, water resistant, plastic band, plain face, no decoration. It ticked loud enough to feel, because she was listening the way she had been trained to listen. Body tuned to small signals, mind stripping away noise until only decision remained. Tick. Tick. The gunman's attention slid to the supervisor's phone clipped at her waist. She had it there like a symbol of authority, access to higher floors, direct lines, the privilege of escalation. "Give me that," he said. The supervisor's hand trembled as she reached for it. A phone passed between trembling hands, not with dignity. With surrender. The gunman took it, thumb hovering over the screen as if he might call someone and force them, finally, to speak to him like he was real, for a fraction of a second. The weapon in his other hand dipped. Not lowered. Dipped. A small lapse, a blink in the geometry of threat. The nurse saw it. Her body moved before the room understood that movement was possible. She stepped forward, one smooth shift of weight, quiet hospital shoes gliding over tile that had been polished into silence. The motion was not rushed. There was no dramatic sprint, no shouted warning, just a decision executed. The stethoscope on the floor abandoned care caught under her shoe for a half second, tubing brushing her soul. She felt the slight resistance, the tiny tug of rubber, and adjusted without looking down. Her hand reached the counter. Her fingers closed around the metal edge. And then she was over it, not climbing like someone unfit, but flowing, economical, precise, controlled. The staff didn't scream yet. They hadn't caught up. The supervisor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The gunman turned, late eyes widening as he realized the ward had produced something he hadn't planned for. The nurse's hand struck his weapon arm, not a wild slap, not a desperate grab, a clean impact that redirected. Force. The gun jerked sideways. A shot cracked into the ceiling tile. Dust and white fragments rained down, briefly glittering in fluorescent light like a perverse snowfall. The sound snapped the ward into terror. Patients screamed now. Staff cried out. A monitor alarm spiked into a frantic beeping, the machine registering panic in a rhythm it could quantify. The nurse didn't flinch. She was already inside the next moment. Her other hand drove forward, catching the gunman at the shoulder and turning him hard into the nurse's station. The laminated counter slammed against his ribs. The phone slipped from his grip and clattered onto the floor, skidding under the crooked chair. The chair rolled slightly farther. Off. Lined out order disrupted further. The gunman fought back, body surging with a raw, untrained fury. He swung his free hand toward her face, wild and heavy. She didn't meet it. She stepped into it. Her forearm rose, angled, intercepting the strike with a dull thud that she felt in bone. She absorbed the impact and used it to close distance, crowding him so he couldn't fully swing again. This was not heroism. This was containment. Her face remained flat, jaw set, eyes clear. No rage, no thrill, no performance. Only responsibility. The gunman's breath came fast, ragged. Her breath stayed measured. In out. Tick. Tick. The watch kept time while the ward became a storm. He tried to wrench the gun back toward her. She didn't. Grab the gun. She controlled the arm. A small difference. A life or death difference. Her hands locked onto his wrist and forearm, turning the weapon away from bodies, away from beds, away from the trapped patients who could not run. The movement was mercilessly controlled, not because she lacked feeling, but because feeling would slow her down. The gun fired again, this time into the wall. Plaster dust erupted. A framed fall prevention poster shuddered and fell crooked, hanging by one corner like a warning no one believed anymore. The gunman roared something rage, grief, years of contempt compressed into sound. The nurse did not answer. Words were too slow. She drove him backward into the swinging door that wouldn't latch. The door flew open under the force of their bodies and then swung back again uselessly, its latch clicking and failing as if mocking the very idea of secure boundaries. Click. Fail. Click. Fail. The gunman stumbled. The nurse stayed tight to him, controlling space the way the hospital never could. Her shoe slid slightly. Tile dust, ceiling, debris, then corrected. Economical. Precise. No wasted motion. There was a flash in her posture, a fragment of another life. Boots on dirt instead of hospital shoes on tile. A heavier uniform. Air that smelled like sand, oil, metal, not antiseptic. A memory without narrative. A body remembering what it had been built for. The gunman's elbow drove toward her gut. She shifted her hips, taking the blow off center.
By midnight, the hospital had settled into its usual lie. The corridors were quieter. The monitors kept their steady hymns of numbers. The staff moved in soft shoes and lowered voices, as if the building itself might wake if they disturbed it too much. It was the hour of controlled emergencies, pain managed into tolerable ranges, nausea softened by medication, fear ignored until it exhausted itself. Inside, the hospital believed it was protected by its own routines. Outside, the city moved without asking permission. Streetlights cast cold halos onto wet pavement. A passing bus hissed at a corner and pulled away, leaving behind a thin fog of exhaust. Somewhere, an ambulance siren wailed in the distance, a sound that never felt urgent until it was your own name being called into it. A man walked alone along the edge of the hospital campus, one hand buried in his coat pocket as if gripping something fragile. His coat was heavy, not fashionable heavy, not elegant, heavy like a decision. The kind of coat worn by men who expected the world to be cold and wanted nothing from it but the ability to endure. It hung from his shoulders with a tired stiffness. The fabric creased in places where his body had folded into itself too often. The collar was turned up against the wind, but the wind wasn't what he was protecting himself from. He was protecting himself from being seen, or from being seen the way he had been seen before. His shoes made no sound on the sidewalk. They were worn down at the heel, the rubber smoothed by distance, the soles thinned by a life built on walking out of places with nothing to show for it. His face was unremarkable in the way despair often was, not dramatic, not cinematic, not cleanly tragic. A man in his 40s, maybe, with stubble that looked less like style and more like neglect. Eyes that had learned to stare straight ahead because eye contact invited questions he could not answer without breaking. He carried a folder. The folder was bent at one corner and sealed with a rubber band. The rubber band had dug into the paper for so long it had left an impression, a thin line of pressure, as if even the documents had been restrained into submission. Inside were forms, evidence of a life measured in stamps and signatures. His name appeared on those pages in black ink. The letters were neat, typed, indifferent. The name did not carry the sound of breath or heartbeat. It was just an identifier, a label, something that could be filed. He had stood in offices beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed the same way hospital lights buzzed. He had sat in waiting rooms with cracked vinyl chairs and signs on the wall that said, "Please take a number," and "No abuse will be tolerated." He had taken the number. He had waited. He had spoken only when instructed. He had watched other people behind glass windows decide the shape of his future with the same expression they used to decide lunch. At the top of the folder's stack was a letter. He had read it so many times the paper had softened, the folds deepened. A denial letter. The kind that began politely, like a handshake offered through a locked door. "We regret to inform you." The words were sharp with formality, designed to sound compassionate while delivering something merciless. They explained in long paragraphs of language that was technically clear but morally empty, that his claim was unsubstantiated, his appeal insufficient, his case lacking the documentation required to be recognized as real. Recognized, that was the word they used, even if they didn't say it, as if pain only existed once the system approved it. The letter was signed with an automatic signature, blue ink printed to look human, a name attached to a title, attached to a department. No phone number, no face, no accountability. Just a final sentence that offered him the illusion of choice. You may appeal this decision within 30 days. 30 days. He had appealed. Of course he had. He had appealed because the world had trained him to believe that if you followed the rules long enough, someone would eventually reward your obedience with basic dignity. He had mailed the forms. He had attached the supporting documents. He had collected the medical records, the bills, the notes from clinics that treated him like a statistic. He had waited again and again and again. The waiting had become its own kind of injury, slow, silent, invisible to everyone except the person trapped inside it. It was not the sharp violence of a punch. It was the soft violence of being ignored so thoroughly you began to question whether your own suffering was real. In one office, a clerk had slid his paperwork back toward him without looking up. "Missing a signature," she said, tone flat. He stared at the space she pointed to. It was blank, one line, one square. "Where?" he asked. She sighed, the sound thick with contempt. "Section 4. He had flipped through the pages with shaking fingers, careful not to tear anything, careful not to appear angry. Anger was always treated as evidence of instability. He found the line. Blank. His voice had come out too soft, almost embarrassing. "I never knew." She had shrugged without lifting her eyes. "It's your responsibility." His responsibility, as if the system was a test and he had failed by not knowing rules that were never explained. In another office, someone behind a desk had looked at him and smiled, a professional smile, the kind trained into people who had to deny requests all day without losing the illusion of kindness. "We understand this is frustrating," the man said. Then he looked down at the file again and said, "But we have to be fair." Fair. The word had been used like armor. The kind of fairness that treated everyone equally by refusing to acknowledge that some people arrived already wounded. The man had told him to try again later, to bring more documentation, to be patient. Patient, always patient, as if time was something he could afford to spend. And each time he left those buildings, each time the elevator doors closed behind him, the world outside had looked the same. Cars moving, people laughing, life continuing. Only his life had remained on pause. His body had changed while he waited. His hands had developed a slight tremor. His appetite had disappeared and returned and disappeared again. His thoughts began circling like animals in a cage. He started carrying the denial letter in his coat pocket. Then he stopped folding it carefully. Then he began crumpling it. Not in rage, not theatrically, just in the slow way a man stopped pretending paper mattered. Now, as he walked toward the hospital, he pulled the letter out again. It was wrinkled hard at the corners, the edges torn slightly. The words were still visible, but the page looked like it had survived something. He stared at it under the streetlight. "We regret to inform you." He didn't feel anger anymore. Anger had burned out. What remained was something colder, more stable: conviction. He folded the letter once, not neatly, and shoved it back into his pocket. The coat shifted with the movement. There was weight beneath it. He had wrapped the weapon carefully, the way someone wrapped something shameful and precious at the same time, not because he respected it, but because he understood what it represented, the final argument available to men who had been denied every other language. A pistol. It sat against his ribs like a secret. The cold metal pressed through the cloth. He could feel it with every breath. He had not bought it with excitement. There had been no thrill in the transaction, no cinematic moment of crossing into villainy. It had been acquired with the same numb deliberation as everything else in his life. A tool, a consequence, a shortcut through walls that would not open. He reached the edge of the hospital campus and slowed. The building rose ahead, large and bright and clean, its glass walls reflecting the streetlights. From the outside, it looked almost beautiful, like modern safety, like professional care, like the promise that suffering would be met with response. The man stared at it the way a person stared at a court building the day their sentence was decided. He had been here before, not as a threat, as a pleading body, as paperwork in human form. The sliding doors at the entrance opened and closed as people passed through, indifferent. A nurse stepped out into the cold for a moment, pulling her jacket tight, then disappeared back inside. A security guard stood near the reception desk behind glass, posture slack, eyes on screens. The guard's gaze did not lift when the man approached. It did not lift when the man stopped just outside the doors. The guard watched, but he did not see. He was trained to observe movement, not meaning.
The elevator doors opened like a mouth. A soft chime, a clean split of metal, a breath of sterilized air. The 7th floor received him without alarm, without resistance, without the dignity of preparation. The corridor outside the elevator was narrow and straight, its ceiling low enough to feel oppressive, lit by fluorescent panels that flattened every surface into a single obedient tone. Ward 7B was marked with signage designed to reassure. Authorized personnel only. Visitors must check in. Policy language, safety language. Words that only mattered when someone cared enough to enforce them. The man stepped out of the elevator. He was not rushing. He did not look like panic. He looked like a decision that had already been made and now had no need for haste. His coat hung heavy on him, the fabric stiff with weight and intent. The folder of paperwork was gone now, left somewhere behind in the lobby, discarded like an old skin. But the denial letter remained in his pocket, crumpled into a hard knot, pressed close to his palm, as if he needed it there to remember why he had come. He walked toward the ward doors. A set of double doors with small glass windows, thick hinges, a keypad, a scanner. The doors were locked, of course they were. The hospital believed locks were the same as protection. He stopped in front of them and looked through the narrow window. Beyond was the ward, long corridor, pale walls, doors in neat sequence, a place that arranged suffering into rooms and called it care. No guard stood there, no officer, no warning, just silence and design. His hand slipped inside his coat.
The weapon came out wrapped in a cloth, folded around it the way a family might wrap silverware for a move, careful, private, almost respectful. He unwrapped it slowly, the cloth falling away in his hands like a confession. The gun looked wrong under hospital light. It was matte and dark, a shape that did not belong among hand-washing posters and IV poles and laminated procedure charts. It looked like a language no one in the building had agreed to speak, and yet everyone understood. He raised it. The first shot landed in the lock mechanism with a crack that did not echo like action movies promised. It sounded smaller than that, drier, more final. A sharp sound that entered the bones of the floor and told the building the rules had changed. The second shot blew out the glass pane beside the handle. Shards fell inward, thin and glittering, scattering on tile that had been polished for cleanliness, not for war. Then he reached through the broken window and unlatched the door from inside. Metal clicked. The door swung open. The ward opened to him like a wound. The smell hit first: antiseptic, alcohol wipes, latex, stale linens, the faint metallic tang of old blood trapped in the fabric of the building. It was the smell of medicine pretending it was mercy. It covered everything like a mask over fear. The sound came next. A nurse's shoes stopping abruptly, the squeak of a cart freezing in place, a monitor beeping faster as if the patient had sensed what the staff could not yet name. There was a moment, one long, stretched moment, when no one moved because no one could process the sight of a weapon in a place built to deny violence existed. Then someone whispered, "Oh my God." The whisper carried down the corridor like smoke. Rooms began to wake up. Curtains shifted. Heads turned in beds. A patient sat up too fast and winced, pain forgotten in the presence of something worse. A woman with an IV line clutched her blanket to her chest as if cloth could stop bullets. Patients became trapped bodies in regulated beds, pinned down by rails and tubing and institutional geometry. Their suffering, which had been treated all night as something manageable, suddenly became irrelevant. Pain did not matter when survival was at stake. And the staff, tired, underpaid, trained for protocol, became targets. Not because of who they were, because of what they represented. The face of a system that had spoken to one man in denial letters and missing signatures and bureaucratic smiles. The man stepped further inside. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the corridor. He was not looking for a specific person. He was looking for a symbol. At the nurse's station, the clipboard lay where it always lay, clipped forms held tight beneath a metal jaw, the pen tied to a string, the computer screens glowing, the whole nerve center of the ward exposed like an organ. The man's gaze settled there. He walked toward it. Halfway down the corridor, a swinging door, one of those beige doors with a narrow window designed to separate clinical space from staff space, swung half open from the tremor of his entry. It should have latched. It didn't. The latch clicked and failed again and again as the door drifted slightly in the draft of the ventilation system. It swung open just a little, then closed again. Open. Closed. A small mechanical indecision, a pointless vulnerability. The door, like the hospital itself, could not decide whether it wanted to be sealed or accessible, whether it wanted to protect or to pretend. The nurse with the plain badge saw him before most of them did. She stood at the far end of the nurse's station with a chart in her hand, shoulders squared, her posture so still it almost looked like disbelief. But it wasn't disbelief, it was assessment. Her eyes moved once over him, coat, weapon, distance, line of sight. She saw the angles, the corners, the blind spots where the cameras didn't reach, the places where staff could hide, and the places where hiding would become a trap. She did not gasp, she did not scream, she did not freeze. Her calm was unnatural in the way calm always was when something inside a person had already made peace with pressure.
She exhaled slowly through her nose, one controlled breath, then another. Her breathing was steady, measured not by panic, but by choice. The red exit sign at the end of the corridor glowed in the dimness like an accusation. It promised escape, it promised safety, it promised a way out. But the hallway was long, the doors were locked, and the exit was a light source at the far end of a tunnel, too far away to feel real. The older nurse from the break room stepped backward, eyes wide. "Put that down," she said, voice breaking on the words. It wasn't authority, it was pleading. The man turned his head toward her slowly, as if he had all the time in the world to watch fear bloom. "Don't talk to me like I'm a child," he said. His voice was not loud, it wasn't even angry. It was disciplined in its own way, a controlled tone that carried the weight of rehearsed grievance. The older nurse lifted her hands. "I'm not—" "You are," he cut in. "All of you are." He raised the gun slightly, not aiming, but reminding. The room didn't breathe. It held itself. A young nurse near the medication room started to back away. The man's eyes snapped to her, quick and sharp. "Stop," he said. She stopped. Her shoes froze mid-step. She stood there, hands half raised, her face pale under the fluorescence. She looked like someone caught stealing they never meant to take. The nurse with the plain badge stepped sideways, subtly placing her body between the nurse's station and the nearest patient room. No one noticed what she was doing. That was her advantage. Her badge swung once against her chest, plastic tapping fabric. Small sound, small symbol. She watched the gunman's stance, the slight forward lean, the way his elbow locked, the way his eyes scanned for movement like someone expecting betrayal. He was not trained, but he was committed. Commitment could be more dangerous than training. At the far end of the corridor, a patient's call light began to blink, a small red pulse. Blink, blink, blink. The sound was faint, but the light was insistent, demanding attention the way the building demanded obedience. The gunman's gaze flicked toward it. For a second, the hospital almost convinced him to respond to the protocol. Then he remembered himself. He stepped toward the nurse's station. The swinging door behind him failed to latch again, a soft click of mechanical incompetence repeating like a nervous tick. The nurse's breathing remained steady. In, out. The kind of breathing taught to soldiers and divers and people who understood oxygen was not comfort, it was control. The gunman reached the counter and slammed his hand on the laminated surface. The clipboard jumped, the clipped forms shifted, paper edges scraping. He stared at the screens, at the names, at the numbers, the kind of information he had begged for in offices and been denied, the kind of authority written into code. "Who of you is in charge?" he demanded. Silence answered him first. Silence, thick and heavy, because no one wanted to become the person he could aim at and call responsible. The older nurse swallowed hard. There's an on-call doctor." "No," he said. "Here, now. Who runs this floor?" No one moved.
The gun did not have to fire again to change the physics of the room. It was enough that it existed. It pulled gravity toward itself, dragged attention into its orbit. It made every face in the corridor recalibrate what mattered. People who had been trained to triage symptoms now triaged survival. Pain charts became irrelevant. Protocols became theater. The hospital's organized language, codes, procedures, policies collapsed into the oldest human instinct: do not be the one chosen. The gunman stood near the nurse's station with his shoulders squared and his coat half open, the weapon held low but ready. He did not wave it wildly. He did not need to. His control was its own threat. He turned his head slowly, eyes moving across the corridor the way a judge moved across a courtroom before sentencing. "You," he said, pointing with the barrel toward the younger nurse by the medication room. She flinched like he had struck her with words. "Come here."
She did not move at first. Her shoes seemed glued to the tile, the soles trapped by terror. Her fingers twitched once at her sides, as if her body was searching for a task to distract itself, anything familiar to do. The gunman lifted the weapon slightly, just an inch. The corridor tightened. The nurse moved. She walked toward him with small steps, trying not to look like she was running, trying not to look like she was resisting. She held her hands out slightly, palms visible, as if proving she had nothing hidden. The nurse with the plain badge watched her walk. She watched her posture bend, the shoulders folding inward. She watched the learned submission in the way the younger nurse's gaze dropped from the gunman's face. She watched fear turn a competent professional into a compliant body. The hospital trained that. It trained staff to obey voices that sounded like authority. It trained them to avoid conflict, to de-escalate, to absorb aggression like a sponge. It trained them that their job was to endure whatever came through the doors because the institution would never stand between them and harm. The younger nurse stopped beside the gunman. He looked at her badge, then at her face. "Phone," he said. "What?" she whispered. He leaned in slightly, the gun now angled toward her hip, close enough for her to feel the heat of his presence, close enough to make her understand that even a sudden inhale could be interpreted as defiance. "Call whoever you call when you want people to listen. Call the ones who never pick up." Her hands shook as she fumbled for the hospital phone at the desk. She lifted it, fingers trembling so badly the cord jerked in small panicked motions. The handset looked too heavy, like a brick she had been ordered to carry across a battlefield. The gunman watched her dial. Her eyes darted toward the nurse with the plain badge for half a second, silent pleading, silent apology. The plain-badged nurse gave her nothing in return, not cruelty, containment, a refusal to contaminate the moment with emotion that would make the younger nurse break completely. The phone rang, once, twice. The sound was thin and ordinary, a domestic noise in a corridor that now felt like a sealed chamber. On the third ring, someone answered. The younger nurse's voice cracked. Hi, this is Ward 7B. The gunman reached out and took the phone from her hand. His grip was steady. Her fingers recoiled immediately, as if the phone had burned her. "This is your problem now," he said into the receiver. His voice was calm enough to sound polite. For a moment, the staff could almost pretend this was a complaint call, a grievance escalated through proper channels, a man making a formal report. Only the gun in his other hand made the truth unavoidable. "What? Who is this?" the voice on the other end demanded. The gunman's mouth curled, barely, not a smile, a recognition of predictable incompetence. "You don't know who I am, but you know what you did." Silence on the line. Then a shift in tone, professionalism scrambling to survive. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remain calm." The gunman's eyes hardened. "I've been calm for years." He handed the phone back to the younger nurse like returning a loaded object and pointed at her with the gun. "You tell them to send someone up, someone real." The younger nurse pressed the receiver to her ear with trembling hands. Her voice came out thin and strangled. "We need someone from administration." The word administration sounded obscene now, a distant authority the staff had been trained to fear more than they trusted. The plain-badged nurse watched the corridor's faces shift at the word. Even now, even with a gun present, the staff reacted to administration like it was a higher threat than violence. That was the hospital's true structure, not medicine, hierarchy. The elevator doors at the far end of the ward chimed softly. Everyone froze. The red exit sign glowed above the locked doors, still promising something the building did not intend to deliver. The swinging door that wouldn't latch rocked once again, clicking uselessly in the background like a broken metronome. The elevator doors opened. A supervisor stepped out. Not the day supervisor from earlier. This one wore a blazer over scrubs, her badge clipped high on her lapel like a medal. Her hair was smooth, makeup carefully neutral, expression professionally composed. She carried herself like someone who spent years being listened to. Her posture was authority made visible. She saw the shattered glass near the ward doors. She saw the staff pressed against walls. She saw the gun, and for a single second, her face revealed something raw and human: fear. Then she swallowed it and replaced it with training. She took 2 steps forward, hands slightly lifted in a gesture meant to look calming. Her voice emerged smooth, low, controlled, the voice of a person who believed words could manage any crisis if delivered correctly. "Hi," she said. "My name is—" The gunman cut her off immediately. "I don't care what your name is." A sharp sentence, a clean interruption. The supervisor's smile flickered but did not break. She nodded as if accepting feedback in a meeting. "Okay, that's okay. I understand you're upset." The nurse with the plain badge felt her stomach tighten at the phrasing. "I understand you're upset." Scripted empathy, a phrase designed to defuse angry customers, not desperate men. It was soft language wrapped around a refusal to take responsibility. The gunman's eyes narrowed. "Upset?" he repeated. "Is that what you call it?" The supervisor took another step forward. "I want to help you, but I need you to put the weapon down so we can have a conversation." The gunman laughed once. It wasn't loud. It was dead. "Conversation," he said. "I've had conversations. I've filled out forms. I've called numbers that never answer. I've done everything you people demand." She nodded again, as if he had said something reasonable that could be filed and addressed later. That must have been very frustrating. The nurse with the plain badge watched the words fall into the corridor like sedatives. Frustrating. Must have been. Very. Every syllable was padded. Each one avoided the truth that his life had been ground down by the slow machinery of bureaucratic contempt. The supervisor continued, voice measured, soothing. "We can connect you with patient advocacy. We can file—" The gunman snapped his weapon upward, aiming it at the ceiling for a fraction of a second. The staff flinched as one body. A patient screamed from behind a door. The supervisor froze mid-sentence, mouth open, her scripted compassion suddenly useless. "No more filing, no more logging, no more paperwork." His voice lowered, sharpened into something almost intimate. "You've been treating people like numbers. Now you're going to listen like I'm real." The supervisor's hands trembled, not dramatically, small enough to be missed by anyone who didn't understand fear. But the nurse with the plain badge noticed. The trembling was in the fingertips, in the slight instability of the wrists. The supervisor's shoulders were still squared, but the body beneath her authority was faltering. The gunman turned his head toward the staff. "You," he said to the older nurse, "sit." The older nurse stared at him. Her eyes were wet. Her throat moved as she swallowed something painful. She slowly lowered herself into a chair near the nurse's station. The chair was one of those hard plastic rolling chairs, designed for function, not comfort. As she sat, it rolled slightly to the left, turning crooked against the counter. A chair left slightly crooked. Order disrupted. The visual imbalance made the whole station look wrong, like even the furniture understood that the rules had collapsed. A stethoscope lay on the floor near the medication cart. It must have fallen when someone stepped back too fast, when someone tried to retreat without drawing attention. The stethoscope's tubing formed a dark loop against the tile, a symbol of care dropped and abandoned. The nurse with the plain badge stared at it for half a second too long. It looked like a question. "What is your oath worth now?" The supervisor tried again. She lifted her chin, voice trembling but maintained through effort. "Sir, you don't want to do this." The gunman's gaze slid to her. "Don't I? You can still walk away. We can still resolve this peacefully." The nurse with the plain badge watched the supervisor's mouth form the word peacefully. It sounded like a demand.
The ward held its breath too long. That was how it always happened. Systems stretched silence past safety. waiting for someone else to take the first risk. The hospital had trained its people well. It had trained them to ask permission to survive. It had trained them to submit to danger as if danger were another policy update. The gunman stood near the nurse's station with the weapon angled downward, his attention divided between the supervisor's trembling performance and the corridor's frightened stillness. His eyes kept flicking a movement, to the blinking call light, to the open doorways where patients stared like witnesses who couldn't testify. He was listening for control. He was feeding on it. The supervisor blazer over scrubs. Badge high like a claim was speaking again, voice low, careful. The words were softer now, stripped of their corporate padding. Please, she said. Please, tell me what you need. Double quotes need. The word tasted wrong in the air, as if a need could be filed, as if what was happening could be reduced into a request. The gunman didn't answer immediately. The silence between them was taut, a cord pulled tight enough to snap in that silence. The nurse with the plain badge felt time narrow. She did not feel fear in the way the others did, hot, dizzy, urgent. She felt it as a cold inventory. Distance, a few feet. Angles, clean, harsh. Cover, minimal. Witnesses, everywhere. Doors, locked. Exit sign, glowing red like a warning that meant nothing. Her breathing stayed steady in out, and beneath it, quieter still, a sound she could feel more than hear. Tick tick. Her wristwatch, a cheap watch, hospital appropriate, water resistant, plastic band, plain face, no decoration. It ticked loud enough to feel, because she was listening the way she had been trained to listen. Body tuned to small signals, mind stripping away noise until only decision remained. Tick, tick. The gunman's attention slid to the supervisor's phone clipped at her waist. She had it there like a symbol of authority, access to higher floors, direct lines, the privilege of escalation. Give me that, he said. The supervisor's hand trembled as she reached for it. A phone passed between trembling hands, not with dignity. With surrender. The gunman took it, thumb hovering over the screen as if he might call someone and force them, finally, to speak to him like he was real, for a fraction of a second. The weapon in his other hand dipped. Not lowered. Dipped. A small lapse, a blink in the geometry of threat. The nurse saw it. Her body moved before the room understood that movement was possible. She stepped forward, one smooth shift of weight, quiet hospital shoes gliding over tile that had been polished into silence. The motion was not rushed. There was no dramatic sprint, no shouted warning, just a decision executed. The stethoscope on the floor abandoned care caught under her shoe for a half second, tubing brushing her soul. She felt the slight resistance, the tiny tug of rubber, and adjusted without looking down. Her hand reached the counter, her fingers closed around the metal edge. And then she was over it, not climbing like someone unfit, but flowing, economical, precise, controlled. The staff didn't scream yet. They hadn't caught up. The supervisor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The gunman turned, late eyes widening as he realized the ward had produced something he hadn't planned for. The nurse's hand struck his weapon arm, not a wild slap, not a desperate grab, a clean impact that redirected. Forced. The gun jerked sideways. A shot cracked into the ceiling tile. Dust and white fragments rained down, briefly glittering in fluorescent light like a perverse snowfall. The sound snapped the ward into terror. Patients screamed now. Staff cried out. A monitor alarm spiked into a frantic beeping, the machine registering panic in a rhythm it could quantify. The nurse didn't flinch. She was already inside the next moment. Her other hand drove forward, catching the gunman at the shoulder and turning him hard into the nurse's station. The laminated counter slammed against his ribs. The phone slipped from his grip and clattered onto the floor, skidding under the crooked chair. The chair rolled slightly farther. Off. Lined out order disrupted further. The gunman fought back, body surging with a raw, untrained fury. He swung his free hand toward her face, wild and heavy. She didn't meet it. She stepped into it. Her forearm rose, angled, intercepting the strike with a dull thud that she felt in bone. She absorbed the impact and used it to close distance, crowding him so he couldn't fully swing again. This was not heroism. This was containment. Her face remained flat, jaw set, eyes clear. No rage, no thrill, no performance. Only responsibility. The gunman's breath came fast, ragged. Her breath stayed measured. In out. Tick. The watch kept time while the ward became a storm. He tried to wrench the gun back toward her. She didn't grab the gun. She controlled the arm, a small difference, a life or death difference. Her hands locked onto his wrist and forearm, turning the weapon away from bodies, away from beds, away from the trapped patients who could not run. The movement was mercilessly controlled not because she lacked feeling, but because feeling would slow her down. The gun fired again, this time into the wall. Plaster dust erupted, a framed fall prevention poster shuddered and fell crooked. Hanging by one corner like a warning no one believed anymore, the gunman roared something rage. Grief, years of contempt compressed into sound. The nurse did not answer, words were too slow. She drove him backward into the swinging door that wouldn't latch. The door flew open under the force of their bodies and then swung back again uselessly. "No," she said, "I'm what happens when they don't show up." The words were not triumphant. They were bleak. They were true. Footsteps pounded down the corridor. Security finally. Running late as always, the sound echoed, heavy and clumsy, like help arriving after the wound had already been carved. The nurse did not release the gunman until hands were on him, gloved, uncertain, eager to reclaim control with restraints and procedures and post-incident protocols. As security hauled him up, the nurse rose slowly. Her hospital shoes were scuffed now, dusted white with ceiling debris. She stared down at them for a moment. White shoes in a place that pretended it could stay clean. Then her hand reached out and touched the shoulder of the younger nurse who was trembling beside the desk. A hand placed on a shoulder. Steady. Deliberate. Not comfort. Anchor. Breathe, the nurse said quietly. The younger nurse nodded, sobbing once, then pulling herself back into her body as if she'd been floating outside it. The nurse with the plain badge looked down at her own hands. They were steady. They always were. But she could feel something on them anyway. Not blood, not dirt. Something harder to wash, moral residue. The supervisor finally found her voice, thin and shaking. Who are you?" The nurse didn't look at her immediately. She looked at the fallen stethoscope still on the floor, the loop of it dark against tile, and at the crooked chair that never got pushed back into place, and at the clip, form scattered from the desk like startled birds. Then she lifted her gaze. "A nurse," she said. The supervisor's eyes searched her face for something, an explanation, a narrative, a hero's speech that would make sense of the chaos. The nurse gave her nothing. She turned away and walked down the corridor toward the supply room, toward the sink, toward the ritual of scrubbing. Her wristwatch kept ticking. Tick, tick. And behind her, the ward began the process it knew best, sealing itself back up, collecting evidence, rewriting the story into something manageable. From above, it would be called bravery. From below, from the fluorescent-lit reality of bodies trapped in beds, it was something colder. One person acting because the system would not, and the cost of that action, physical, moral, unseen, would not appear on any clipped form. Asterisk. The hospital did not mourn. It processed. By morning, the shattered glass at the ward doors had been swept up into plastic bins and wheeled away as if broken things could be erased by removal. The ceiling tile that held the bullet hole had been replaced with a fresh white square, to clean, to new an attempt at revision. The corridor smelled sharper now, disinfectant layered heavier than usual. The institution scrubbing not just for germs, but for narrative. The night staff were sent home in staggered silence. Patients were reassured with phrases that sounded like, "Blankets, you're safe now. It's over. Everything is under control." The monitors continued beeping. The fur drips continued falling. The floor continued gleaming. The building continued doing what it had always done, surviving itself. The nurse, with the plain badge, slept for 4 hours in a room that felt too small for her body. When she woke, her ribs still ached where the gunman's elbow had caught her. Bruised purple pain sat beneath her skin like an unwanted memory. She showered. She washed her hands longer than required. Still, she could feel something clinging. Not blood. Not dust. The weight of what she had done. She returned to the hospital that afternoon because the system demanded her presence. Not for gratitude, not for care, for accounting. A security guard met her in the lobby. Not the bored one from the screens. This one stood straighter, his uniform pressed, his posture tight with rehearsed authority. "Ma'am," he said, voice formal. "They're expecting you." He handed her a temporary visitor sticker. Even though she worked here, even though her badge was clipped to her chest like always, even though she belonged to the ward more than any executive ever could, the sticker was a small humiliation, a reminder. No one belonged here except the institution itself. She followed him through the lobby, past the glass walls that reflected her back at her controlled posture. Calm face, badge glinting in daylight now like a quiet accusation. They rode the elevator to the administrative level. It smelled different there. Less antiseptic, more carpet, more artificial air freshener, less human. The walls were hung with framed posters about innovation and patient-centered care. Smiling stock photo faces, diverse enough to be marketable, clean enough to be fictional, the kind of imagery designed to convince donors that suffering was being handled responsibly. At the end of a corridor, a conference room door stood open. Inside was fluorescent light without mercy. A long table sat in the center with black chairs arranged neatly on both sides. Water pitchers, paper cups, a bowl of mints no one would touch. Everything was aligned into institutional symmetry. At the far end of the room sat 3 people. A hospital administrator in a tailored suit, silver hair smooth as polished stone. A risk management officer with a laptop open, fingers poised above keys as if typing could control reality. A lawyer in a gray blazer, her expression neutral in the way neutrality often was trained. Deliberate, weaponized. On the table in front of them were microphones, small and black, pointed upward like miniature surveillance devices. The nurse paused. At the threshold, the room's cold precision pressed against her skin. The administrator gestured toward a chair on the opposite side of the table, alone. An isolation disguised as procedure. "Thank you for coming," the administrator said. Her tone was mild, professional, the kind of voice that could deliver both condolences and termination letters without changing volume. The nurse sat. The chair did not squeak. It was too new, too controlled. She placed her hands on the table, fingers relaxed, palms down. Her posture was straight, but not stiff. She looked as if she had been invited to speak and intended to be precise. The lawyer smiled thinly. "This is an incident review hearing," she said. "We're here to understand what occurred." Understand. The word was spoken like a promise, but the room was not built for understanding. It was built for liability. On the table in front of the nurse was a legal pad. Fresh. Blank. Its pages were white and untouched, like the institution's preferred version of history. The nurse did not pick up the pen. She didn't need notes. Answers she didn't need help remembering. The risk officer tapped a key and began. At approximately 047, the suspect entered Ward 7B. A firearm was discharged. "You engaged with the suspect physically, correct?" "Yes," the nurse said. One word. Clean. The administrator leaned forward slightly, hands folded. Before, her expression did not change. Her voice stayed flat. The gun exposed the hospital to significant risk. The risk officer's jaw tightened. The administrator spoke again, slow and deliberate. "You're not being accused, but you have to understand there are protocols for hostage situations." The nurse exhaled through her nose. "Controlled. Hostage situations require trained response," she said. "You didn't provide one." The lawyer interjected, tone careful. "We're not debating resource allocation." Of course they weren't. Resource allocation was always treated as neutral math, not moral choice. The nurse leaned forward slightly, just enough to bring her presence closer to the microphones. Her voice remained restrained, but the words carried. "Wait now," heavy with clarity. "You left one security guard in the lobby watching screens," she said. "You staffed nights then. You trained us to de-escalate with words and compliance. You trained us to submit." The administrator's eyes narrowed. "We trained you to prioritize safety." The nurse's gaze stayed steady. "You trained us to prioritize the hospital's comfort." A silence fell that felt like a door closing. The administrator's posture stiffened. "Do you believe you acted appropriately?" "Yes," the nurse said. The lawyer tilted her head slightly. "Even if your actions could have escalated the situation." The nurse did not flinch. "I didn't escalate it," she replied. "He escalated it when he brought a gun into a ward full of people who couldn't run." The lawyer's eyes cooled, as if certainty irritated her. The administrator spoke again, voice now edged with discipline. "You are aware that you used force against a civilian." The nurse's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "A civilian with a firearm," she corrected, "in a hospital." The risk officer's fingers finally typed, clacking softly. The sound was relentless. A keyboard making notes, a machine translating moral necessity into institutional risk. The lawyer leaned back. "We also need to address your communication," she said. The nurse's eyes sharpened. "My communication?" "Yes," the lawyer continued. "Several witnesses reported that you were abrupt, that you didn't follow the supervisor's lead." The nurse's gaze moved to the blank legal pad, still untouched, still white. It waited for her to soften her language, to decorate her actions, with politeness, to apologize for surviving in a way that disrupted the system's narrative. She did in single quotes t. Her voice stayed even. The supervisor's lead was scripted empathy, she said. It wasn't leadership, it was theater. The administrator's face tightened. Watch your tone. The nurse's eyes stayed on hers. Watch your policies, she replied, too. Lines dotted blades. Then silence again. The microphone sat between them like silent judges. The administrator folded her hands. You have a background in tactical response, she said suddenly. The room's temperature seemed to drop a fraction. The nurse did not react visibly, but the muscles in her jaw tightened for a moment. A fragment. A tell. The lawyer continued, voice. Careful. We've been informed you have prior military experience. The nurse's breathing remained steady. Double quotes. Is that relevant? She asked. The administrator's expression turned almost satisfied, like she had found the angle she needed. It may explain your instinct to engage. Instinct. The word reduced her decision to impulse, to aggression, to recklessness. The nurse's eyes sharpened. It explained my ability to act, she said, not my desire. The administrator's gaze hardened. So you're saying it's because of your military training that you intervened? The nurse answered without hesitation. No, she said. It's because I was the only one left. A pause. The risk officer stopped typing for a second. The lawyer's eyes flicked down to her papers, as if searching for a safer question. The administrator straightened, voice now colder. Institutional cruelty dressed in formal calm. We have to consider whether your actions violated workplace conduct, she said. Workplace conduct. In a ward where people had been staring down a gun barrel. The nurse stared at her, expression unchanging. Are you saying you'd rather a nurse die quietly than act without permission? The administrator's mouth opened, then closed again. Silence answered instead, because the institution could not say yes out loud, but it could imply it. The lawyer cleared her throat again, voice smoother. We're going to recommend administrative leave pending further review. There it was. Punishment disguised as procedure. The nurse looked down at her face-down badge. Plastic. Temporary authority, a name the hospital used when it needed labor, and discarded when it needed distance. She did not argue. She did not plead. She did not soften her face to make them comfortable. She reached out and slid the badge toward herself without flipping it over. Then she stood. The chair remained slightly out of line, which she rose never quite pushed back into the neat geometry of the room. A small disruption, a reminder. The administrator's voice followed her, sharp now. You're not to discuss this with media. You're not to speak with patients about the incident. You're not to. The nurse paused at the door. She turned her head just enough to be heard. I won't decorate your story, she said. Then she opened the door and stepped out. The hallway outside was carpeted and quiet, lit by softer lights designed to soothe executives, not patients. It felt like a different world, sterile in a new way. Behind her, inside the hearing room, the microphones remained on the table, small black objects ready to capture narrative, not truth. The legal pad stayed blank, and the hospital, in its endless instinct for self-preservation, began doing what it always did after violence, turning the person who acted into the problem. From above, the incident would become policy updates, training modules, carefully worded emails. It would become a memo about workplace safety and appropriate response. From below, from the fluorescent reality of Ward 7B, it would remain what it always had been, a system that demanded submission, even from the one who refused to let people die. The city learned the story the way it learned most stories, now through headlines that arrived already edited. By sunrise, the first notification hit phones like a pulse. Armed gunmen storms hospital. WARD staff and patients. Sapphic words were arranged to reassure, to contain, to imply that danger had been managed cleanly, efficiently, professionally, like a spill wiped up before visitors arrived. By noon, the language sharpened into something more. CLICKABLE. Chaos at City Hospital. Shots fired on 7th floor. Evening, it became spectacle. Hero nurse subdues gunman in dramatic takedown. Clips were grainy. Security footage cropped and zoomed, framed into a narrow tunnel of action. The cameras had watched from the ceiling like indifferent gods, and now the footage became evidence repackaged into entertainment. The moment, a decision, a shift of weight, a clean strike. The weapon sliding across tile looped again and again on screens. Divorced from the smell of antiseptic, the sound of patients screaming, the sickening truth that the ward had been one locked hallway away from slaughter. A commentator on a local news panel leaned forward, eyes bright with performative gravity. "She's being called a hero," he said, "a true guardian angel." Guardian angel. The phrase landed like perfume sprayed over blood. No one spoke about the denial letter. No one spoke about the security guard behind glass. No one spoke about the supervisor's scripted empathy collapsing into please. No one spoke about how the ward had been turned into a sealed chamber, how the red exit sign had glowed like a promise no one intended to keep. They spoke of bravery because bravery made people feel safe. They did not speak of abandonment because abandonment made people angry. At the hospital, administration moved fast, not to grieve. To manage. The lobby was scrubbed again. New signage was installed beside the security desk. Zero tolerance for violence. A poster with bold fonts and a smiling nurse photographed in soft light, hands clasped gently. Safety framed as a shared responsibility. As if safety had ever been shared equally. Security staffing was reviewed. A memo circulated about incident response improvement. A mandatory online module was assigned to staff, de-escalation and workplace safety refresh. The hospital loved modules. Modules made compliance measurable. They made morality optional. A press conference was scheduled on the front steps beneath the glass entrance, framed by banners and carefully placed podiums. A hospital spokesperson stood with a microphone and spoke the language of institutions: sympathy, gratitude, commitment to safety. "We are grateful for the swift actions of our staff," she said, smiling with practiced sorrow. "We are committed to supporting our employees during this difficult time." Behind her, the glass doors opened and closed as people passed through. Open, close, open, close. A steady rhythm of continuation. The hospital metabolized the crisis the way a body metabolized poison, breaking it down, converting it into something survivable, something that wouldn't threaten the organism's ability to keep moving forward. The nurse watched none of it. She had been told carefully, formally, not to speak to media, not to speak to patients, not to speak at all beyond what policy allowed. The institution had reached for her when it needed action and reached away from her the moment it needed distance. Administrative leave, they called it, a temporary pause, a bureaucratic muzzle. She spent the days at home in silence that felt louder than Ward 7B ever had. The bruises on her ribs faded from dark to yellow, healing the way bodies healed, quietly, automatically, without applause. But the moral residue stayed. It sat under her skin, a weight that didn't show on scans. At night, she woke at the same hour she had always worked. Her body still kept the schedule. Her mind still walked the corridor, the swinging door that wouldn't latch. The stethoscope on the floor. The phone passing between trembling hands. The watch ticking. Tick. Asterisk tick. Tick. The sound wasn't real, but it was permanent. When the hospital called her back, it was not with gratitude. It was with procedure. An email, a date, a reminder to review updated safety protocols before returning. No apology for the hearing room. No acknowledgement of the truth that she had acted because the system had failed. Only instructions, only policy, only the assumption that she would comply because she always had. She returned on a night shift the way she had arrived on the first, quietly, without ceremony, badge clipped to her chest like a claim she did not believe in but still wore. The lobby was the same. Glass walls, polished floors, fluorescent light falling with indifferent precision. The security guard behind the desk was new, younger, straighter posture, eyes on the screens as if vigilance could be performed into existence. He glanced up as she approached. "Badge," he said. She held it out. The scanner beeped. Green light. "Permission granted." He handed it back. "Stay safe," he muttered, as if safety were a personal hobby. She took the badge without comment and walked toward the elevators. The lobby reflected her again in the glass. One body, two images, both moving forward under light that never softened. Above the elevator doors, the number blinked. The doors opened on the 7th floor. The corridor smelled the same. Antiseptic and old air. Cleanliness over fear. Ward 7B had been repaired. Of course it had. The hospital had replaced the ceiling tile, patched the bullet marks, installed a new lock mechanism on the ward doors. The swinging door now latched properly, the click sharp and final, a small improvement, a symbolic concession, but the geometry of the ward remained what it had always been: long corridors, narrow turns, Doors that could trap as easily as they could protect. The exit sign still glowed red at the end of the hall. Still far, asterisk still unreachable for patients. Still a promise that depended on someone else's willingness to open the way. As she walked down the corridor, she noticed the lights flicker once overhead, a brief, irregular flutter, then steady again. It could have been nothing, a failing ballast, a harmless glitch. But she felt it anyway, an omen disguised as malfunction. The ward was quiet. Nurses moved with tired economy. Patients slept in regulated beds. The monitors beeped softly. Each sound a reassurance that someone was still alive. At the nurses' station, the clipboards sat waiting. Clipped forms. Boxes. Lines. Small spaces meant the whole enormous truths. The older nurse looked up when she saw her. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened into something that was not warmth, but relief. "You're back," she said. The plain badge nurse nodded once. "I'm back." The older nurse hesitated, then leaned in, voice low. "They really tried to hang you out to dry." The nurse's eyes flicked toward the cameras overhead, the slow rotation of glass and machine. "They didn't try," she said. "They did." The older nurse's mouth tightened. "You okay?" The nurse didn't answer with comfort. She answered with function. "What's the board look like?" she asked. The older nurse exhaled a tired laugh. "Same as always. Too many patients. Not enough staff. Complaints logged into the void." Logged? That word again. The ward's favorite ritual. The nurse picked up the clipboard. The metal clip snapped shut with its familiar click. She clicked her pen once, a switch being thrown. She began reading. Room numbers, names, diagnoses, pain scores. Allergies typed in red. The machine language of human suffering. Her hand moved across the paper. Steady. Controlled. As if nothing had happened. As if she had not pinned a gunman to the floor with dust on her shoes and time ticking in her wrist. But the silence in her was heavier now. Asterisk. Not because she regretted what she'd done, because she knew what it meant. She knew that the system would never reward dignity, only compliance. That it would call her a hero when it needed a headline, and call her a liability when it needed protection. That it would never truly see her as a person, only as a tool that performed under pressure. Nobody knew, the headlines had said. Nobody knew the night nurse was an Army Ranger until armed gunmen stormed the hospital ward. The truth was sharper than that. People had known in the way institutions always knew what they could take from someone. They had known she would show up. They had known she would hold the night together. They had known she would carry responsibility like a burden and never ask for applause. They simply hadn't cared who she was until the moment the system needed her to become a myth. She walked down the corridor toward room 716, the same room, the same door. Inside, the patient who had struggled to breathe was still there, discharge delayed, consult pending, the family exhausted by waiting. The woman in the headscarf sat beside the bed now, eyes ringed with fatigue, hands clasped. The teenage boy slept in the chair, his body twisted into a posture of endurance. The nurse stepped in quietly. The woman looked up. Recognition flashed across her face. Not fame, not media. Something deeper. Memory. "You," the woman whispered. The nurse nodded once. "How is he tonight?" she asked. The woman's throat tightened. "Still, same." The nurse checked the monitor, adjusted the oxygen cannula slightly, and listened to the patient's breathing with a calm that did not feel like indifference. It felt like commitment. The woman's eyes fell. "They said you saved people." The nurse did not look up right away. After she placed a hand briefly on the woman's shoulder. "Steady. Deliberate. Anchor. I did my job," she said. The woman's voice trembled. "But they tried to punish you." The nurse's gaze lifted then, eyes clear under fluorescent light. "Of course they did," she replied. The words were not bitter. They were factual. Outside the room, the corridor lights flickered once more, brief and sharp, then steadied again. The hospital held itself together with electricity. In denial, the nurse stepped back into the hallway. At the end of the ward, the locked doors clicked as they shut behind a passing staff member. Click. Seal. Contain. The sound was the hospital's true heartbeat. Not the monitors, not the drips, the locks. The nurse walked toward the nurse's station. Again, her badge clipped to her chest, glinting under fluorescent light with each controlled step. The building watched her through cameras that didn't intervene. The system filed her actions into reports that would never contain their moral cost. The headlines would fade in a week, replaced by fresher tragedies, cleaner stories. But Ward 7B would remain. The corridor would remain. The locked doors would remain. And the nurse would remain too, moving through the night with quiet posture, steady breathing, hands that knew how to heal and, when abandoned by the system, how to fight. No one would truly know her, not the public, not the administrators, not the polished voices at podiums. The institution did not care who saved it. It only cared that it survived. And so it swallowed the crisis whole, digested it into policy upgrades and safety posters, and returned to its endless, antiseptic routine, lights humming, doors locking, cameras watching, silence growing heavier each night, because that was what it was built to do. Not to see, not to change, only to continue.